Mayor Heartwell, you just returned from Los Angeles, where you were part of the newly formed White House Task Force on Climate Preparedness and Resilience. Can you tell us a little bit about this task force?
Well, sure. Well, this was our second meeting, Lisa. We are a task force appointed by President Obama that consists of 8 governors, 16 local officials, 14 of us are mayors, and there are 2 county supervisors, and 2 tribal leaders. The fascinating thing about this group is the diversity of geography that we represent. So we have Governor Abercrombie from Hawaii, who comes to the meeting saying, my problem is I'm losing islands to rising ocean levels. We have the tribal chairman Sewell from above the Arctic Circle, who says, I'm in urgent need of relocating entire communities of people because the food stock, the sustenance food stock of fish and seals that we've counted on for millennia are vanishing with warmer water. We've got the East Coast that's experiencing hurricanes, and we've got the West Coast now experiencing drought. We've got the middle of the nation, the Mayor County of Des Moines, Iowa, with 2 500-year floods in a 3-year period. We had our own flood in Grand Rapids, so we have a little sense of the urgency of that. But the impacts are incredibly diverse, and yet the cause is singular. It's the result of climate change. So we've been impaneled with a 1-year life and told to bring the President a set of recommendations that will help, whereby the federal government can help local and state governments and tribal communities to become more resilient against the impacts of climate change. First order of business is executive orders, anything that the President can accomplish simply by standing up on his 2 feet and saying, we're going to do this. Second order of business is infinitely more difficult, and that's legislation. And the administration is very clear that the big legislative initiatives that it's so easy to dream up aren't likely going to go anywhere with this Congress. The national energy policy that you and I long for, that would help move this nation rapidly toward a future where we're no longer dependent on fossil fuels for our electrical power. It ain't going to happen under this with this Congress. So we're impaneled with the idea that we're going to bring the President a set of recommendations because he wants to get stuff done.
That's great. You have been an amazing leader, thus your appointment to this task force. You've been a leader not only in the state of Michigan and for the city of Grand Rapids, but truly for across the country. And you have goals in the city of Grand Rapids such as 100% renewable energy by 2020. For you, as a representative of the Midwest, of the Great Lakes, what do you see as a climate resilient city? What would you like to see Grand Rapids look like?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you. You're overly generous, I think, in the accolades, Lisa. But I love it. So thank you. You know what? The fact of the matter is, I came to office at just the right time, and with a great group of city commissioners, our city council, that really pulled together quickly behind a sustainability agenda. And so we've been able to move the ball in Grand Rapids and accomplish some pretty remarkable goals. What does a resilient community look like? Well, what we know for certainty is that the impacts on our region, that is the Great Lakes region, are going to be seen in increased rainfall. And the studies that we've had completed on climate change suggest that that's going to be spring, winter, and fall, and that summers will tend to be drier and hotter, but increased precipitation.
I've certainly
in
seen
the other
that.
3 seasons. Well, we have, haven't we? This is a perfect example of it this year with our snowfall, and last year with our rain. And it is a virtual certainty that those precipitation events will happen as events. They're not gently spread out so that the land can absorb that water and refresh the aquifers, but it comes suddenly and violently, and it overflows the capacity of a city to storm system, for example, to handle it.
And you saw that very clearly last year in Grand Rapids.
Well, we did. And when you look at the impact of the flooding in Grand Rapids in April of 13, it was felt most directly, and it caused the most damage, not at the Grand River, but in the neighborhoods. In fact, neighborhoods far away from the river, because you build out a gray storm system, a stormwater system, to handle normal rain events. And this was an abnormal rain event historically, but we think it's going to be more and more the norm in the years to come. The other thing we know is that we can expect, on a hotter planet, we can expect more extreme storms, straight line winds. We have not experienced the tornadoes that the Plain States and Illinois have experienced. Ours tend to come in the form of straight line winds, but they can be very damaging. One of the vulnerabilities that you have with straight line winds and tornadoes is your electrical infrastructure, your grid, and so it becomes imperative that we protect and harden the grid. Not something that a mayor has typically any control over. And in fact, something that governors typically don't have any control over. It's a federal issue, it's a national issue, and it has to be addressed at that level. We also know that we're going to have more extreme heat events, and we experienced one of those in the summer of 2012, where we had 9 consecutive days with temperatures above 90 degrees and a humidity above 90%. In fact, I think temperatures in Grand Rapids got to 104 with very high humidity rates. And then your vulnerable populations are at risk. Your elderly living alone without air conditioning, infants, people with respiratory diseases are at risk. And you've got to find ways to protect them and make sure they get the services that they need when those events occur.
So as the task force is convening and making recommendations that could be accomplished via executive order, as you pointed out, or if need be via legislative action on the part of the Congress, is there also a conversation ensuing about what kind of incentives could be in place to encourage our state legislatures and governors to take action as well, or is that a next tier of this? Well,
that's a very keen observation, and it's not something we've talked a lot about. I believe we understand that the impacts of climate change are felt most directly at the local level, which I would include states. Then states and cities are the ones typically left to deal with the disaster when it happens. The federal government comes after the fact, and with our flood, Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, came in after the fact and was very helpful in reimbursing certain costs that we incurred. The Small Business Administration reimbursed costs for both businesses and homeowners who had losses. So the federal government has its role, but we've not really focused so much on what we can do to change state statute. I think that's up to you and me.
Indeed, and that's a whole other subject matter, I suspect. But I do think that we're all eager to see what kind of recommendations come out of this really interesting body. As you pointed out at the outset, representatives from a broad spectrum of different locales with different impacts happening in those locales based on the changing climate. I often wonder if places like the Gulf Coast or Florida or New York, Hurricane Sandy, the areas represented by those local officials may not get more attention than a place like Michigan, that is often thought to not have as substantial an impact or felt impact than those areas along the coastlines.
Well,
Are you feeling that?
I think it's absolutely true, Lisa. And our disasters are smaller in scope. We don't have Hurricane Sandys or Katrinas here in the Great Lakes. And yet the cumulative effect of the impacts on our area, amounts to a significant disaster, significant change in how we see, how we understand ourselves, how we live in this region of ours in the Great Lakes. I mean, I have coastal mayors from the Fresh Coast here in the Great Lakes area expressing concern about the falling lake levels and the impact on commercial shipping in and out of the ports in the Great Lakes, and even the harbors and pleasure boating and sailboats coming in and out of harbors, and the extraordinary costs that need to be incurred in dredging to make sure that these safe harbors and ports are available.
And as we saw recently with the passage of the Farm Bill, which doesn't seem to be clearly connected to this, but I'll make the connection, there was actually climate change involved in the passage of that bill, in that we now have insurance based on a changing climate that's been sewn into that bill.
Right.
Senator Stabenow led the way on that and was very clear in recognizing that a place like Michigan, with a variety of different crops grown here, the most diverse state in the nation in terms of our agricultural base outside of California, is being threatened by the changing climate. So I'm imagining you're also thinking about that as you go forward.
There are 4 working groups as part of our task force. I serve on one that's called Built Systems. There is an agriculture and natural resources subgroup, and they're working on exactly these issues. I mean, invasive species or insects and noxious weeds that are able to grow outside of their range, the strange weather patterns and their impact on drought on corn 2 years ago, the loss last year of virtually our entire fruit crop on the west coast of Michigan. So agriculture and natural resources is another key sector. Disaster preparedness is a third. And now that I've started this, I'm drawing a blank on the fourth, but it'll come to me in just a minute.
Well, you're about to give an address here at the University of Michigan Law School. I savor these moments when we have experts like yourself come in and actually speak to university students, especially law school students who are going to make their careers in the legal arena, and we expect many of them in public policy perhaps as well. From the perspective of the task force and your experience thus far, I think there have been 2 meetings thus far, maybe more.
Yes, two meetings so far. Right, so
what do you hope to leave them with as you speak to them about climate change and the work that you're doing on the task force?
Yeah, sure. Well, what a privilege for me to be able to speak here at the University of Michigan Law School. My father was a graduate of this great institution and was always very proud of his JD from the University of Michigan. Mark Van Putten, a good friend of ours, is a great environmentalist, teaches a course in environmental law, and invited me to come over and speak, and invited a few friends like you to sit in on the class. So that just sort of ratchets up the pressure. What I'm going to do today is take a little bit of liberty. Don't tell Mark.
Mom's the word.
Don't tell Mark. But I want to spend the first part of my time with the students and audience this afternoon wrestling with some of the big ethical issues around climate change, the impact of or the intersection, if you will, of our daily lives and how do we live as ethical human beings in an era of climate change. It raises some enormous issues that, you know, I can't start to address fully, but I hope we'll start to stimulate some thinking among the students. And then I want to talk about some of our experience in Grand Rapids. I brought along our Grand Rapids Climate Resiliency Report that is, I think, such a fine example of a plan for climate change. It looks at 22 distinct vulnerabilities in Grand Rapids and develops at least the framework for problem solving around each of those 22 vulnerabilities. So I'm going to talk a bit about what we've done in Grand Rapids. I'm going to talk a little bit about the task force, and then this is another one. Don't tell Mark. I told him that. But I'm going to use this group of students and audience, so you'll be prepared when you go in, to help answer two big questions that we're asking our networks all over the country. We being the members of the task force. And so the Michigan Municipal League is responding to this, the American Public Transportation Association, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, and this law class at U of M this afternoon. And that's first of all, what is a big challenge or that you have experienced or an opportunity that you may have thought about where climate change, around climate change and community resiliency. And then the follow-up question to that, of course, is, you know, what are the strategies that the federal government might implement to assist in this situation or to support work around a particular opportunity. So I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we're here and I've got a captive audience, and I'm going to sort of tap the wisdom of the law students and others.
This is a wise group of students, no doubt. They've made it all the way to the University of Michigan Law School. I hope that you get some really great information and feedback from them. And I'm grateful for your leadership and for asking groups like this to actually participate in good thinking about, frankly, the largest challenge facing us, which is our changing climate.
Well, when you think about this group of 26 people that have been gathered, I mean, it's just 26 people. That's 26 minds, 26 sets of experiences. But each one of us has really quite remarkable networks throughout our community, our state, and even the nation. And so the challenge to us from the president was to tap all of that wisdom that's out there and condense it, if you will, into a set of recommendations for action. But the problem, it's a good problem to have. Right now we've got such a full boat that if we were to dump it all on the president, it would swamp him. So we've got to filter it down. We've got to shake it down. We've got to put it through a sieve until what comes out are really powerful, useful strategies for the federal government to help make cities, states, and tribes resilient.
Will you have a chance to actually sit with the president and actually talk through the final recommendations?
I believe so. I believe that's the plan as they've laid it out for us, that this fall we'll have a chance to meet with the president and go through the plan point by point.
Well, he's charged you with a big job, and I know that this group is more than up for it.
Well, you heard his State of the Union address, and he's
right.
serious. He wants to get stuff done.
That's right.
And this group is focused and is working hard to make sure that what we give him is in fact useful.
Well, as I think the only representative from the state of Michigan, am I right about that?
That's correct.
Bill, we have great trust in you.
All right.
In representing what the state's challenges are. Certainly you've seen that firsthand as the mayor of our second largest city. And I thank you very, very much for your leadership on this front and for serving on the task force.
Thank you, Lisa.